Hello and welcome back to the Godot community. My name is Sahira Dean. I'm the virtual PLC lead for high school 2D art. In today's webinar, I'll share a few tips, especially if you're new to teaching AP. Some of the things that we'll talk about are under the topic of starting the conversation early. So this has to do with accountability for deadlines, having students document their process, encouraging students to experiment, requiring revision, promoting discussion, and then I'll highlight a mini investigation at the end of this presentation. So the first one is holding students accountable for deadlines, and this definitely needs to start in the lower level classes. Just because once you get a student in AP, if they're used to having really lax deadlines, then they'll be really lax in their AP with deadlines, I've found. But if you're a teacher that is not big on deadlines, if you like to give them, a lot of time and flexibility, a few things to keep in mind are that having deadlines definitely does encourage students to be a little bit more productive. And this is unless you have a really extreme case of a student just, very lethargic and, which that's a whole nother conversation. But for the most part, I've found that allowing students to, or holding students accountable for a deadline does help them to be more productive, especially for your students that like to plan and prioritize, different things they have coming up. It helps students to troubleshoot. So for example, if they have a lot of things due or coming up on a certain date, but they know all the deadlines, especially in advance, this will help them to troubleshoot their calendar, different things that might come up. It might open up a conversation or two about, what's going on. Especially they're more prone to come to you, the teacher, I found, if they're struggling a little bit. It helps to encourage motivation, focus, and again, prioritizing. And this is not for every single student, but for the most part, I've found that when you're announcing a deadline ahead of time, students are definitely more aware and more motivated to get things done. So documenting the process, this is one big thing with AP. They want to see students process, and you want to avoid talking about progress, but more so process, or at least having students know the difference between process and progress. So pre-planning, how are students getting their ideas? So if you're coming up with, and of course in the lower level classes, they are a little bit more teacher driven. In some of my upper level classes, starting in like the second semester of Draw Paint 2 and then Draw Paint 3 for sure, it becomes a little bit more, here's your criteria. Now I want you to take your, spin and make it your own. So I do require a lot of pre-planning with visual verbal journals, process details, having them to write, take pictures, reflect, and then encouraging students to think about the thought behind the decisions they're making. So why did you make that particular choice, and document it. And of course, documentation is everything. So having students take pictures of, all their process, and, actually put it either in a PowerPoint, which you'll see in a little bit, through sharing a mini investigation. But you can also, have students just turn in pictures of process early or keep a folder. You do want to encourage students to experiment and then also require revision. A lot of times I found if you don't require it, students might not go back and revise, even if they have this really, really cool idea or kind of an epiphany moment throughout a project. Unfortunately, students are driven by a grade. So a lot of times I'll go in and require a revision randomly throughout the semester. And then of course, experimentation, both experimentation and revision are a part of the AP rubric. So you want to start that conversation early and actually welcome it in all of your classes. You definitely want to promote discussion. And this has a lot to do with just asking open-ended questions. I mean, you can start with, okay, what's working? And then the conversation kind of evolves from there. What's not working, what could be improved, and how. What choices did you make in order to make personal connections between the subject matter, materials, and idea. And a lot of times, starting with these kind of, level one questions opens up a whole nother conversation with the student about what's going on, how they can dig a little bit deeper, especially if you're sharing some ideas about some artists they might want to look at, or maybe sharing some experimentation ideas with basic media. So here's the part of the presentation where I share a project that I like to do with my Draw Paint 3 students. And this is the mini investigation. So of course, if you're teaching AP, you're very aware of, or if you're new to teaching AP, you're very aware of the sustained investigation, which is of course what the whole course is outlined around. So the mini investigation is something I really like to do, and it's really helped students transition into the AP course that next school year. So this is a PowerPoint. It's a blank PowerPoint that I give students that I have to, I ask them to make it their own, leaving some of the questions. They can add more slides. So I ask them to think about big ideas, the area of focus, why, and this is really big, this hopefully gets them to think about, why this is important to them, as opposed to, oh, this is cool. So I do ask that students try to make a personal connection with their work, and then it has them come up with a research question, which essentially is their inquiry that will guide this particular mini investigation. And then documenting process, so sketches and research, there's some questions there, asking them specifically to look at artists, how they're connecting with those artists, students especially that are really, really interested in history or political events, or, just kind of keep up with the news, asking them to make some historical connections, just because nothing is new technically under the sun. It might, be their interpretation of it, but someone else has typically done, what they think is a new idea in some kind of way, and that's really important for them to look at. And then feedback from peers, right? So I have them do some buddy shares, some conversations around their investigation throughout this process. And then evidence of first steps. So again, just kind of documenting sketches, ideas, how they're coming up with their particular investigation, just all documenting the process here. Materials, honestly encouraging them to try out materials. And experimentation does not have to be trying some brand new material that they're not familiar with. Sometimes it can be, depending on what their SSI is, but it doesn't have to be, and I stress this to students. Experimentation can be you taking that material that you're really, really comfortable with and doing something new or innovative with it. And then it goes on to, continue to research more about the process and has them document that there. And then it goes right into the SSI. So I have them do 3, depending on what point in the semester I'm at. I've had them do 5 one time. This particular year I did it at the end of the semester. And then, SSI sketches that are relevant to that first investigation. And then revisions, that's on here. And then I always have a due date on the PowerPoint before I give it to them. That way they can plan their calendar accordingly. And then there's an area in here for feedback from their classmates. So I like to do, it could be the student talking in front of the class. It could be a partner share where they have to talk with at least 3 to 5 classmates, depending on the size of the class. Or it could be kind of the sticky note, which I really actually like because they get to keep their feedback, and then they can document it here in the PowerPoint. Okay, so here on my screen, I have a mini investigation example from a previous student. And you can see she went in and kind of labeled or, added her own information. The question she ended up coming with was, how am I impacted by death around me? So it's a great question. It's really specific. It's not too broad. She can draw from personal experience with this investigation. So that was great. And then I'm just going to scroll through what she uploaded. So here's her sketches that she came up with. I give them a little brainstorm sheet that has them to kind of really think and reflect and write. So that's there. And then materials and brainstorming. So again, just documenting their process, how they're coming up with their ideas. You can see, she's doing a little bit of experimentation there. Some more research. You can see she is taking her own picture, which is awesome, that she's using as a reference for hand in one of her pieces. This is an example of the sticky note critique that we did in class. You can see all the sticky notes from her class, from her peers. And what I do like to do is introduce students to the rubric or some of the language of the rubric at this point, and they're using that to drive some of their feedback. And then, just here's her first piece here. And just so you know, on the for the AP, the portfolio that you submit or have students submit, they can put more than one image on their slides. So I encourage that also. And then we're just going to continue through her going into her second piece. And then she took a little bit more experimentation and risk with media here in the third. And then just kind of scrolling here all three works together. You can definitely see how they, build upon each other, right? And then I have them do an artist statement, which is kind of similar to what they'll do for the AP and for the AP process, except this is a little bit more open-ended. So I give them some questions to kind of think about and guide their artist statement. And I do limit the word count just like they would on the AP portfolio. So that does conclude today's webinar. Thank you so much for tuning in with me today. Please feel free to join me on the Please feel free to join me on the Godot community at High School 2D Art, where we can interact, ask questions. You can interact with teachers from around the state of Georgia. And I'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you so much.